This episode of Wheat Pete's Word is brought to you by Miravis Neo from Syngenta. You can trust Miravis Neo to protect your corn against diseases like gibberella ear rot and tar spot. Miravis Neo is the only corn fungicide solution that delivers yield and quality all in one jug. Visit syngenta.ca for more info.
Good day and welcome to Wheat Pete's Word here on Real Agriculture for Wednesday, August the 14th. On this episode of the Word, man, the weather disparities just continue and there are some really weird outcomes. Oh gosh, Wheat Pete woes, some things Pete wished he hadn't found out. The performance trials are available, the cereal crop performance trials. We have to talk about that. Some really cool cover crop data from Mike Cobra that I need to discuss. And then at the end, of course, Agronomy Answers. Let's go! Yes, the weather, there is no equity in weather. We've learned that this year across the country. There just is no weather equity. In Saskatchewan, they've got drought. Meanwhile, with the remnants of Debbie coming through along the north shore of Lake Erie and then out through eastern Ontario, the rain is just horrendous. Meanwhile, there's some really weird stuff going on. So what's cool is that Ohio is reporting that they are 7 to 10 days ahead of normal crop development, even though planting date was relatively normal. So the crops are maturing faster with the added heat they've had in that region. And oddly enough, when we get down into the Niagara Peninsula, and it's more than just the Niagara Peninsula, by the way, but that is kind of getting down into the south part of the province, the things about nature just seem to be oddly ahead of schedule. Trees that normally wouldn't drop leaves or change color are starting to turn already. Jerry, in particular, quoting some old-timers that are just coming. Jerry's a great agronomist down in the Niagara Peninsula, and he says, man, Pete, the old-timers are coming to me and saying, like, what is going on? It's the middle of August, but nature is telling me it's the middle of September. And my answer to that, and I have no idea, this is hypothesis, this is not based on scientific fact, but man, we had a really mild February. We had an early start to the wheat crop. The wheat crop, we harvested it 2 weeks ahead of normal for the most part. And I think that a lot of our perennial crops, a lot of our nature, our perennials, winter wheat is a winter annual, and I just think that they're all responding the same to that warmer weather than normal throughout the winter and early spring, and so they are more mature than we would normally expect. But man, things are definitely oddly ahead. So for people like Nature Nut Nick, which Nick, I haven't heard from you in a week or so, is that what you're seeing as well? I'd be really interested in some feedback, but things do seem oddly ahead, and some of the crops, they are maturing, much faster than we would have expected. Meanwhile, we go to other parts of the globe, and oh my gosh, I talked with Andrew, met him in the UK. The UK is, at least in that region, 25% below normal yields. And they are blaming the incredibly wet fall, wet winter, wet spring that they had, as well as 25% less solar radiation, less sunshine throughout their spring growth period. And that was because it was cloudy and raining all the time. And if you really want high yields, you need enough moisture. If you don't believe me, talk to the guys in Western Canada or in the droughted areas of the U.S. Midwest, man. You have to have moisture. But after that, you really do want bright sunshine to drive yields. 25% less solar radiation, 25% below normal yields. The excess water plays in there too, but it is just kind of an interesting relationship to look at and note. All right, Wheat Pete's woes. Oh my gosh. So Pete does plots, right? That's just what Pete's all about. And Pete has a corn variety plot. Oh, we have more plots than that in the cornfield, but regardless, a corn variety plot. And so I tour in there just to check out what it's doing like. And remember, I scout that field on a fairly regular basis. I try to walk through it. And I'm going across and I'm looking at it saying, yeah, pollination is pretty decent. It's not perfect. We had a great agronomist session Monday night. If you didn't catch it, I think give it a listen if you could. We'll link it in the post. But there is so many weird things happening in pollination this year. In Western Canada, they have all sorts of issues with blast in the oat crop, with pod abortion in the canola crop, wheat is actually showing low bushel weight in Manitoba's harvest because they just got so hot through grain fill. They shortened that grain fill period, and so lots of pollination problems that we're seeing out there. And I wanted to check pollination in my own crop. For the most part, it was good, but there was these odd blank kernels, and you just kind of go like, what happened with that in particular? But that is not the purpose of this story. As I walked out of my cornfield, I come across an 8-foot-tall water hemp plant. And I just go, oh, we do have water hemp in the area. I don't have water hemp on my farm. I pulled that plant out. It had not set seed. So the purpose of my story is continue to scout. If you see odd-looking pigweed plants that shouldn't be where they are, make sure you pull them out. It's just, man, by the way, that corn crop was cleaned up with glyphosate permit. I had a bit of nutsedge. I thought, let's get on top of the nutsedge. Permit is the best on nutsedge, so just trying not to let it get out of hand. Really wasn't an economical spray. There weren't enough weeds there to actually spray. My spray guy, Bernie, said, Pete, you're spraying this, but there really isn't many weeds here. I'm a little anal on weed control, so we sprayed it anyway. The permit did an awesome job on the nutsedge because I walked it after, so hopefully that ends that problem or at least reduces any future issues. Regardless, that water hemp plant came through glyphosate permit, which is a group 2, so just guaranteed it is both Group 9 glyphosate and Group 2, so the Group 2 herbicide's resistant, and I'm just going to have to watch that field at harvest. For goodness sakes, pay attention when you're out there scouting those fields. Look for those odd pigweeds. Okay, I got to move on. I want to talk about, yes, the cereal performance trials. So kudos to the Ontario Cereal Crop Committee. They have the draft data up on gocrops.ca. Not only winter wheat draft performance trials, but also winter barley. For the first time ever, we have winter barley performance trials. So have a look. Go to gocrops.ca, then select cereal information, and then you have to select performance trial results to get to that information. But lots of really cool data there. Some really exciting new varieties. Swoop, OAC Virgo, 25R29, Fuse, all with a 110 index or higher. And it's really interesting because there was an article that said in the UK yen, the UK wheat yen, they actually think that variety selection is only 1% of the answer for the difference in yields. Man, when you look at the cereal performance trial, and AJ from Kansas, he sent me his data. So Kansas State University has a trial on his farm. The varieties in his trial ranged from 59 bushels per acre to a 107 bushel per acre. That's not quite double, but it's pretty darn close. I'm thinking variety selection is more than 1% difference. I think it makes a huge difference to get, and there's lots of good varieties out there, but some of the older varieties, Ava, soft white winter wheat, it's ancient. And man, you can really see it in the trials. It is suffering badly compared to these new genetics. So pick the right variety. The way to do that is to go to the Cereal Crop Committee trials. One other quick note. pay attention because we have the intensive trials, which really means they're sprayed with a fungicide twice, one at weed control timing, or T1.5 if you will, one at fusarium timing, and we have standard trials. This year, with the stripe rust, there's a 14 bushel per acre yield increase to using the fungicides on the wheat crop. And if you are an intensive grower, if you are willing to use fungicides, I think you really have to look at the intensive trial data much more so than the standard trial data, because the standard trial data in 2024 was massively impacted by stripe rust and doesn't necessarily give you the actual best answer for your genetic yield potential if you're willing to control stripe rust. Okay, just while I'm on that whole fungicide note, Ellen Sperry's tweeting out a picture of the oat performance trials where we did not, again, intensive, right? We spray, we don't spray. Where we didn't spray those fungicides, the oats are flat, flat, flat. It's called crown rust. Crown rust is devastating on oats. And so it just really drives home this point that there are times when fungicides are essentially a necessity, and this is going to be true until our oat breeders can give us a resistant oat variety to stripe rust, which they're working on, but they haven't quite got there yet. And one last quick note on that before I get to cover crops. Warren Schneckenberger tweeting out that he just saw a hint of white mold in his soybean crop. They were sprayed twice. My answer back to him is a touch of white mold turns into gold. All that says is you have an amazing crop. But on the white mold issue, man, it is really interesting that we do not have more white mold showing up in a lot of these crops because we've had excess amounts of rainfall. Believe it or not, excess amounts of rainfall is negative to white mold. White mold likes a lush, thick canopy with high humidity, much more so than free moisture. So white mold this year, you still got a control for it for sure, but not maybe the big problem we thought it would be. All right, I want to move on and talk about cover crops. So lots of questions about cover crop burn downs, and Lindsay and I talked a little bit about this on the Monday radio, Agronomy Monday. Mike Cobra pulled together all the data from the screening trials that they do for the weeds team. So the weeds team has to be able to know what herbicides show what injury symptoms on what weeds and what crops, because when they go to the competition, they get into farmer situations where the farmer says X and the reality is Y, and they have to be able to sort that all out. What that gives is a tremendous resource to say what herbicides impact things that we don't normally expect them to impact. So Mike went through that information because we had asked, if we're going to burn down ahead of planting our cover crop with glyphosate, that's great. But if we have glyphosate-resistant fleabane out there, or if we have water hemp, glyphosate-resistant water hemp, what can we add to the tank and still then, after we burn down, not damage whatever cover crop we're planting? In Mike's database, man, with sunflower, buckwheat, canola, daikon radish, red clover, so we've missed a few. We don't know about phacelia and a few of the other ones, but that's a lot of what we would put in to the cover crop mix. You can add 2,4-D ester with the glyphosate, do better weed control, 2 modes of action, hopefully take out the fleabane. Fleabane's not perfect with 2,4-D ester, but it will prevent it from going to seed, so that's really what we're after. You do that and you wait even a few days, it looks like there's not enough residual there for the 2,4-D ester to hurt those cover crops. So that information is gold. I hope Mike writes a Field Crop News article and puts that up, but that information is absolutely gold. While I'm on cover crops, a caller called in from Lindsay and said, Pete, okay, you have totally confused me on cover crops because you are saying kill them in the fall, don't let them get big, and that is 100% the opposite of what I thought we were trying to do with cover crops. And by the way, I can buy a no-till drill and get funding through the off-calf program, the Climate Action Fund, if I don't kill that cover crop or till it until the following spring. So like those two things are just diametrically opposed. And so to that particular caller, you are 1,000% correct. I am not in favor of leaving cover crops uncontrolled until the spring because they can cause all sorts of problems. And you are also right that in a perfect world, we would want the cover crop to get as big as possible and do as much root growth as possible and leave it over winter because that's maximum soil benefit. But the problem is that when we get big residue, we get big problems in the spring. And that is exactly what some growers have seen. So agronomically, put the programming aside, the off-calf program aside. They are trying to get that through the winter, protect the soil. And if you don't have too much residue, you can leave the residue on the surface and then do some tillage or no-till through it next spring, and that's okay. So if you want to use your no-till drill, plant your cover crop late, like 1st of September, so that the oats don't get too big. And then next spring, hopefully winter kills the oats and you don't have to actually control the oats next spring, but then you don't have massive problems. If, though, we get an open fall like we had last winter and those September oats start to go to head, I will just about guarantee that it will be big residue and it will mean less yield next spring. So I'm not a programming guy. I'm an agronomist. I want to make sure you grow the best crop possible. To make sure you grow the best crop possible, you don't let that residue get big, and you do weed control in the fall, which will also kill the cover crop, but it will kill the perennial sow thistle, the Canada thistle, the wild carrot, the chickweed, and so I don't have to deal with those issues nearly as much the following spring. So it's a trade-off. But programming and Peter's agronomics don't always go together perfectly. All right, I want to move on, and I want to talk quickly about slugs. So Jerry sending me a picture of a snail feeding on corn silk and saying, man, he'd never seen that before, and slugs this year because of the excess moisture, just horrendous. Normally, we don't expect much slug activity in the heat of summer because it's dry. This year, slugs just seem to be keeping going because of all the moisture that we've had. Doug sending me a picture of this little block of perfect red clover beside this block of the odd plant, maybe 3 plants in the picture, and this is in wheat stubble. And Doug's saying, treatment A, I got red clover. Treatment B, I didn't. And of course, Wheat Pete says, well, Doug, that's great, but what the heck were the treatments? And Doug said, well, treatment A with the perfect red clover was about $1,000 per acre equivalent of sluggo, plus a bunch of diatomaceous earth. And yeah, it looks like slugs are one of the issues. I guess we've known that for a while. Really hard to control, but maybe that's why where growers do more tillage, we get better red clover because we have less slugs. Of course, the tillage brings along other issues, but wow, what a difference that sluggo made. All right, here's another quick note. We have confirmed anthracnose in edible beans in a field in the Oxford County area, in another field in Perth County. Both of these situations, the field was not sprayed with a fungicide. Anthracnose is an incredibly devastating disease. We have varieties that have good resistance to all 3 known races of anthracnose in Ontario, but we have lots of good varieties that do not have resistance. And in the cases where growers couldn't get to the field because it rained too much or it was a 3-cornered piece of the field and they missed that piece, man, anthracnose looks like it's going to be really devastating this year. If you did not get your field sprayed with a fungicide, your edible bean field sprayed with a fungicide, my gosh, check it out. depending on maturity, it may still be economical to control anthracnose because it can be absolutely devastating. Okay, I'm running out of time here. I'm going to really quickly finish up with lodging because Lindsay asked me this question. She has a field that she drives by a lot, and she says, Pete, the headlands are standing. The rest of the field, I believe it's a wheat field, the rest of the field is lodged. Like, why would that be? I was thinking compaction. And Ben in Northern Ontario sent me a picture and said, Pete, why is it? And this happens all the time in spring wheat, in winter wheat, in barley, and oats. The only spots left in the field that are still standing are where the sprayer tracks are, the rows right beside the sprayer tracks. So, Lindsay, in your case, the outside rounds, if it's to the line, my guess is that's a varietal switch. I'm not sure, but typically, if it, to the line, you just got to think it's a man-made thing. It's variety. If it's only on the compacted headlands, as you suggested, compacted headlands, we don't get as much top growth because the roots have to struggle through the compaction. So compaction or compacted soils do mean less lodging, just like heavy clay soils mean less lodging. Heavy clay soils are naturally compacted. The roots can't grow as easily. We see less lodging. But in Ben's situation, we see this all the time. Why do those two rows stand beside the wheel tracks of the sprayer? Whether it's tram lines or it's tramp lines, those rows stand better. And the answer is because, number one, there's lower population or effective lower population in those rows because there's nothing beside them. With lower population, we get less plant-to-plant competition, less height on the crop, better standability. We know one of the ways to reduce lodging is reduce population. But the other thing, and Shane and I have seen this in our demonstration trials, in our research trials all the time, where we leave rabbit runs to separate treatments, and particularly if those rabbit runs get a little bit wider, maybe to a 2-foot wide gap, we will get up to 50% more heads in those rows. They will be 3 or 4 inches shorter, and they are that way not only from the population, but also because they get more sunshine. There's no competition beside them for sunshine. They get more solar radiation. They build bigger, thicker stems because they get that more solar radiation, and they don't lodge as easily. With that, once again, I am way over time. That's it. That's all on behalf of the team here at Real Agriculture. This is Wheat Pete with the word for Wednesday, August the 14th. Hey, keep the questions, keep the comments coming, and I will talk too long again next week. See you then.
Thank you for downloading this episode of Wheat Pete's Word, brought to you by Miravis Neo from Syngenta. You can trust Miravis Neo to protect your corn against diseases like gibberella ear rot and tar spot. Miravis Neo is the only corn fungicide solution that delivers yield and quality all in one jug. Visit syngenta.ca for more info.